Hello team, I'm back. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 23rd of April 2023. We are going to be looking at the map in a second, but I just want to dip into what the Institute for the Study of War American think tank says at the beginning of their daily report. There's quite a lot of stuff to discuss. I'm not going to talk about Kherson yet, but there is lots to say about the counteroffensive and the Russian posturing at this present moment. So Wagner Group financier Prigozhin is likely attempting to persuade Russian President Putin to go over to the defensive ahead of a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive. So there's this desire to say, hey, look, things aren't supremely great for us. I think that's the implication. We've exhausted ourselves. We've taken some territory, but we need to now be thinking about the defensive because, hey, Ukraine are going to attack soon. Prigozhin is also advocating that Russia is to focus on holding the current front lines rather than seeking more gains so that Russian forces can regain their combat effectiveness for later offensive operations. The Russian military command is likely attempting to convince Putin to turn to defensive operations as well. So you've got Prigozhin saying this and the MOD saying this, but they may be unable to bluntly deliver this message to Putin. Some ultranationalist figures argued that the Russian MOD signaled efforts to recruit 400,000 contract servicemen to ensure that Russia has enough military personnel to defend existing front lines and to efficiently freeze the current front lines in Ukraine. The Russian military command is also reportedly transferring conscripts to hold the Russian lines in Crimea and may be planning to prepare other resources to ensure that Russia can retain some lines once the potential Ukrainian counteroffensive culminates. Russian Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of Russian General Staff Gerasimov are likely sensible to the threat of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, but are likely continuing to send contract servicemen to reinforce senseless offensive operations at Putin's insistence. That's a really big claim. Kremlin sources previously revealed that Putin favors loyalty over competence, and this sentiment likely prevents Shoigu and Gerasimov from focusing on setting optimal conditions for an efficient defense by refusing to expand Russian elite units in grinding attritional battles for marginal gains. In other words, the Russians are senselessly attriting their own forces in what's effectively fairly tactically pointless exercises such as in Bakhmut, Marinka, Avdivka. They keep sending troops on the offensive. They are not getting anywhere. They might take Bakhmut, but at what cost? And this then leads into the idea that Bakhmut has been effectively successful for the Ukrainians in doing exactly what they wanted, which is biding time, attriting the Russian forces, exhausting the Russian forces so that they are even more vulnerable for a counteroffensive. And now the MOD and Prigozhin are saying, hey, we need to get on the defensive, but Putin, it appears, seems to be still offensively minded. ISW previously observed that Shoigu and Gerasimov were likely unable to convince Putin to conduct mobilization in May 2022, despite the fact that Russia needed such a measure to constitute forces necessary to maintain offensive operations in Ukraine. I don't know if that's May 2023 that's supposed to be, or whether that's referring to last year. Because there are calls for mobilization now, and it doesn't seem like it's been put in place to happen. Putin's continued insistence on Russian offensive operations in eastern Ukraine, i.e. Bakhmut, Avdivka, Marinka, suggests that the group that wants to freeze the war along the current front lines has not fully persuaded Putin. And this doesn't really bode well for Putin going forward and the Russians, because they are continuing to exhaust their forces in sort of offensives, whilst the Ukrainians are getting even more ready and prepared for their big counteroffensive. And do the Russians have enough mobilized troops? If they're calling in to play conscripts in Crimea, is that contractually allowed by what conscripts are supposed to be able to do or not able to do? They're not supposed to be used as frontline troops, etc., etc. Okay, let's get to the front line now. I just thought that's a really important preamble that gives you a sense of the turning tides, not necessarily in successes or anything, but just in phases here as we move from a Russian offensive phase to a Ukrainian offensive phase, but whether the Russians aren't ready to accept that, or at least Putin. I don't know. Right. This is the war map. We're going to go to the Kupiansk-Kreminna front line. Sorry, I'm still in Bakhmut here. So that looks like this up north here. So we have Kupiansk down to Svatova here, and then that's down to Kreminna down there. So that's the axis we're going to look at. The ISW says that there are repelled. Ukrainians say there are repelled attacks in Liman, Pershi, and Bilohorivka. That is, Liman Pershi is up here, and Bilohorivka is right down there. We'll come on to Bilohorivka in a second. So there is activity at two ends of the axis, and also in the middle. So that's from the Ukrainian General Staff. The Russians are saying that they have advanced in the forest near Kreminna, and that they are attacking towards Terny, Nevska, Kuzimivka, and Bilohorivka. So that is Kuzimivka there, Terny, which is down here, and Nevska's there, Terny there. So there's activity in places up and down this axis. And then Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces have conducted ground attacks near Vadyakivka, Rozdolivka, Vesele, and Spirna. Now that's going down towards the northern area of the Bakhmut theatre, with Spirna just there, Vesely, Vasilivka, Vazyakivka, sorry, Rozdolivka just there. But if we come back up to this Chervonopopivka area, Russian sources have claimed that they've repelled Ukrainian attacks near Torska and Dubrova. So Torska is there. So Ukrainians attacking in Torska and Dubrova, which is just this little town on the edge of the village southwest of Kreminna. So both sides seem to be at a point where they are attacking, at least according to the claims of the Russians here. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces conduct periodic counterattacks near Chervonopopivka as well. So that is here, and that's what I was going to talk about. So it's interesting that the Russians are attacking at various places up and down, from Liman Pershi to Kuzimivka to the forest area, and just around just north west of the forest area. But at the same time, Ukrainians are attacking in a number of different places too. So this might represent this kind of turning of the phases as we move from a Russian offensive to a Ukrainian offensive, and that's represented by the fact that there are, both sides seem to be active along the front line. So now, as we come to Bakhmut, we'll come further down south here, go into what is probably quite recognizable geography to you now. There has been quite a lot of territory taken by the Russians, as according to pro-Ukrainian mapper Deep State map. However, I think it's actually really a map alignment with what Syriac maps have been saying for 4 or 5 days now. There's this massive disparity between the mappers in this northern area, with Deep State map having this as the line, and then suddenly it's kind of updated and there's a massive amount of territory taken. I don't think it was actually taken over the last 24 hours, but I just do think they were getting their mapping in line. I was saying I can't quite understand why they still don't have this area in the north under Russian control. But there's lots of talk about the road coming in through Kromova, this O0506 highway that comes in from Chaziv Yar there, comes down there. The ISW says about that geolocated footage published on April the 21st indicates that Russian forces have advanced up to a section of the O0506 highway northwest of Kromova, immediately west of Bakhmut. So let's look at that geolocated footage. This entails sort of trench attacks on trenches. So the Russians are in trenches, and I think that's what this footage shows. And they're getting, you can see the highway there and that trench just north of there. I wonder whether that is here. This is the area we're talking about, or nearby. Let's go and find where that is geolocated. Oops, sorry, clicking on the wrong place. So this is the geolocation for that trench. Let's now put that on our map and see where the Russians are. And that is actually right on. I don't know whether that is actually where the trench is. Or whether that is, because unfortunately this is in, so that's west of Bakhmut. So the translation of that tweet is uh, location of the road 00506 northwest of Kromova, and this footage, it says, if I can just get my Google Translate working, Bakhmut direction fights for the road to Kromova. NSU Rubizh Rapid Response Brigade is working. So again, it doesn't tell me much. It doesn't tell me who is actually hitting who there, unfortunately. So yeah, heavy fighting on the northern side of Bakhmut in the Kromova road area. Despite constant attacks and shellings, Russia don't made any significant progress for weeks. Well, yeah, it seems that they have interdicted that road, at least practically. Whether they are that the other side of the road or not, there are contradictory claims about that that's been going on for a few days. So anyway, that situation. Sorry, that doesn't tell you as much as I'd like it to, but you can see that the activity is all happening in and around that section of the 00506 highway. And indeed, that's what the ISW spends most of the time talking about. So Russian mill bloggers claim that Wagner group fighters are conducting assaults along the road in the area, but reiterate that the Russian forces have not encircled Bakhmut. Russian and social media sources claim that Ukrainian forces have not been using that highway for some time because Russian forces have been heavily interdicting the road. Russian and social media sources claim that Ukrainian forces rely on roads that pass through Ivannivska and on numerous field roads in the area to supply the Ukrainian grouping in Bakhmut. This is to say that actually that road is not being used because of obviously the proximity of the Russian forces. So they're using the T0504 highway that comes to the south, and the roads through the fields are dirt tracks between these two highways in this area here. However, there have been some seriously heavy rains, I think, recently, and that has hampered the ability to supply the Ukrainian troops. So Russian and social media sources claim that Ukrainian forces rely on the roads that pass through Ivannivska, and that heavy rains have washed out Ukrainian-controlled dirt roads into Bakhmut, making withdrawals from the city impossible. Another Russian mill blogger continued to claim that heavy rains are preventing wheeled vehicles from using field roads, but asserted that Ukrainian forces are able to use tracked vehicles along these roads into Bakhmut. There are talks about the usual kind of repelled attacks to the north and to the south, Ivannivska, Kromova, Bodanivka, Hirivka. So these are all the usual kind of areas that you would expect here, 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 and Ivannivska as well down here. So no particular territorial exchanges there. But as we come into the city, let's go and look at some of our other sources. So here we have War Mapper giving us a general overview. Russians have advanced south of the rail station, and they've also continued to advance closer to the Kromova road. So coming down here in that direction, as well as around the railway station there, and indeed just south there, which is to say on my map. Okay, let's have a look. So there have been some, as you can see, I haven't moved my blue line. So there's been some increase of territory around this area, as well as here particularly. So this was the largest area of gains. Deep State actually had that gain yesterday, but Deep State has now admitted that this grain elevator area is under Russian control. There was that disparity between the two sources. Now the Russian and the Ukrainian sources agree that really the Russians are now pretty much to the west of the railway line, all the way up and down the railway line. So the railway line is no longer effectively a barrier for the Russians, and it's just a case of taking more and more territory. There's increased territory for Syriac maps in this area as well. So if we move on, this is what Poulet-Vallon's map indicates, which is red lines everywhere, as you can expect, particularly in the city centre region. No reports pro-Ukrainian mapper says Bakhmut, the battle is now on the western side of the railway tracks. There is confirmation of our early observation a few days ago that Russia controls Bakhmut central train station in the area of the 00506 near Kromova. Russian troops have moved closer. The situation has been adjusted. So this is that red area there. So no reports admits that things are tough. And Wagner troops at Bakhmut railway station. So there's video footage of that. As you can see, assumed under Russian control up north here, there is increasingly smaller amounts of land that the Ukrainians control. Here is what Syriac Maps pro-Russian mapper says of that area near the 00506, the battle to control Kremova-Chaziv Yar road are proving to be insane due to the exposition of artillery and the extensive trench system. This is the approximate control of both sides. No truth about the physical cut by the Russians. But then more recently has said that the current situation in Bakhmut city from the eastern axis, the Russian army took control over the first high buildings adjacent to the railway, thus moving the front line to Polihava and Pavla Novorodetseva streets. And then goes on to say that meanwhile, from the southern axis, troops secured Hirlagiv and Hiria Skorovorody streets and tried to enter the industrial college where they were repelled. So there's activity to the east here. And to the south as well, as they tried to move into this industrial college area there. So on my map, that would look like success here, and trying to move in this general area there. Some success for the Russians in this area. A couple of blocks are taken as from yesterday. So the Russian line was, I think, on Syriac maps, it did go broadly like this, perhaps. So it's all this kind of area seems to be taken over the last few days, and then here as well. So that's what's going on in Bakhmut. Again, in general speak, it's, as I've been saying the last few days, which looks like it's an organized withdrawal of sorts, or just allowing the Russians to take the land. But the assumption would be that they are bleeding in doing so, that the ratio of losses for the Ukrainians to the Russians is in the Ukrainians' favor, and that's why they are continuing to operate as they are. Let's look just at a couple of final bits and pieces. Ukrainian soldiers have killed Wagner mercenaries in a trench combat. It's quite a lot of trench combat footage. This is in this area. I won't show you the footage because it's obviously inappropriate. And that's trench warfare going on here. So very close to where we were talking about. So that there are Russians are trying to. There's this whole network of trenches here, and so it's quite difficult to work out who controls what, because you might be in one part of the trench, in another part of the trench, the other side is controlling matters. So it's really dynamic and pretty horrific warfare going on. We have Rob Lee talking about how Colonel Pavlo Palisa said ammunition shortages have repeatedly forced the troops inside Bakhmut to withdraw from their position. So this is the claim that the Ukrainians are still suffering from ammunition shortages in Bakhmut area. We don't have enough rounds to engage them, he said, and I recognize we are paying with the lives of our soldiers. So all is not well there. At least that is a claim that we see here. And they need, it says this is not information operation aimed at Western media to garner more aid. This is basically, we need more ammunition to do the work we're doing there. Just facts. We're not trying to scare the West into giving us more aid. And then in Klishchivka, a Ukrainian drone has taken out an ammunition depot, I think, forward supply point here. And so it's being spotted, and then it's actually artillery, not an ID. So it takes out that's in Klishchivka, as we see in a little while. There we go. Explosion much later on. So find out where it is, let it all get dropped off, and then hit the depot, so on and so forth. And there we go. Much more significant explosion there as you get the ammunition cooking off. Where is that? Well, Klishchivka's been hit quite a lot for these kind of targets over the last 3 or 4 days. And that is just for a bit of geolocation fun over here. I just love the way they zooms out and zooms in again. There you go. That's in Klishchivka, and that's along that road there, which is south of Bakhmut, and well behind the lines, and that'd be quite a useful position, you'd imagine, for ammunition for their troops for these fronts here, but taken out by the Ukrainians. Anyway, just a bit of geolocated footage to to give you an idea of what's going on. We'll move on now to Avdivka. So that is broadly what is taking place in Bakhmut. ISW doesn't say too much else that's worthy of dwelling on. So we'll move down to Avdivka. And there has been some claims of, so if we go back to Suryat maps, they say, there we go. Suryat map says of that area of Avdivka, situation on the Avdivka front, latest artillery shelling over the railroad confirms Ukrainian army control over this sector. So this is, I'm going to zoom in on my map here to explain what's going on here, and I've moved the map accordingly. So if you remember the Russian, well, you may remember the Russian line was here for Syria maps along the railway line, and they've been trying to hit Stepova, and there were claims initially when they did this counter or this offensive here that they had taken Stepova, but they hadn't. This is really important for maintaining supply into Avdivka and for stopping Avdivka being surrounded, just as important as Severny is to stopping the encirclement of Avdivka. However, it appears that perhaps either Suryat maps wasn't accurate and is just redressing their maps to be more in line with Deep State map, the pro-Ukrainian mapper, or that actually the Ukrainians have counterattacked in that area. So they continue. Despite Russian army and DPR forces bringing reinforcements, they've made no significant advances. This was over the last few weeks, only minor advances southwest of Vesele. So tiny little advance just there. I mean, literally half of the field. So yeah, that's this. They have changed their map here, but they've not put in that the Ukrainians have taken that area as they normally would with their blue dotted lines, a bit like that, but in blue. So I don't know if it's just a rejigging of their maps or a counterattack as mentioned. Right, so as far as the ISW, what's that say about Avdivka? Essentially the usual sort of stuff. So claims of repelled attacks going on in all the normal usual culprits here: Novokulinyove, Pervomaisky, Nevelsky, indeed Marinka further down south, Krasnohorivka, so on and so forth. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces thwarted Ukrainian attempts to regain lost positions west of Novobakhmutivka. So that would be the attempt of the Ukrainians to hit back around here, but the Russians thwarted them. That's according to the Russians. So there's obviously some push by the Ukrainians here. There could be a push there around Stepova, and otherwise repelled attacks around Vodyane, Pervomaisky, and Nevelsky further down south. In fact, Deep State map has a slight realignment, tiny little gain for the Russians around there. Don't know if that's from a counterattack or rejigging the maps as well. We shall see. And then as we come further, so that's really Avdivka, not too much change, still activity kind of north and south of there. As we come down to Marinka, there's a bit from the ISW to say about Marinka. Oh, no, actually, I want to show you a bit of footage. This is nothing really to do with front lines, but it's easy to get carried away with mapping, right? And you're drawing lines on a map, and you forget that if a line moves or whatever, even if I say that, oh, the line hasn't moved, but there's still activity there, this involves people dying. This involves, on both sides, just hellscapes and stuff that these people will never forget. And if it doesn't kill them and injure them physically, then it will do so mentally. But it's not just the soldiers involved. It is the families, the people, the children. And here is a child in Avdivka getting taken out of Avdivka. And I'll leave you to read the subtitles. I won't read them myself this time. I'll just leave his voice as a child, just so you get a sense of, a child's voice and how this affects not just soldiers, but everyone.
С нами ехать? С мамой?
Да.
Маму забираем, Маню, да?
Да, а папа тут.
А папа тут останется. Будет кормить собаку, курей, да, утей.
Да. А как я же без папы буду спать? Я ж с папой.
Ты всегда с папой спишь?
Да. Еще маленький.
Давай. Держись. Бронежилет.
Сильно стреляют в Авдеевке?
Ну да.
А ты знаешь, что надо делать, когда стреляют?
Да. снаряд. Потом увидел осколок такой валяется.
А что надо делать, когда стреляют?
Когда прятаться. Прятаться надо.
Ты прятался?
Да,
А где ты прятался?
шифонер.
Ты будешь с нами ехать?
So, just an insight into the human aspect of this conflict, and a child hiding in cupboards, is always sleeping with his father at night. Obviously, there's a safety sort of feeling of safety there, and who will I sleep with now as he's being taken out of a war zone? Just worth remembering these things for sure. As we come on to Marinka, there has been quite a bit of activity there. The ISW says Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are increasing pressure on Marinka and have recently reinforced the area. Spokesperson for the Ukrainian Defense Forces in Avdivka operational direction has stated yesterday that Russian forces had deployed poorly trained assault detachments to the Marinka area with orders not to retrieve wounded personnel from the battlefield or to keep track of the number of dead. Interesting if true. And no report says of Marinka, besides Bakhmut, the only places where Russian conducts offensive actions is Marinka. In the north around Vuhledar, Ivano-Frankivka, there are attempts by Russian troops to gain territory without success. In Marinka, no positional changes have been made for months despite fighting. I would disagree. I think there are positional changes, and in fact, I've updated my mapping here where I wasn't sure exactly what was going on in this kind of area. Deep State map has that under Russian control, so I think they really do control the north and areas of the south, this industrial area here, and it's fighting around Druzhba Avenue that hasn't particularly changed over quite a considerable amount of time. This is all just rubble. And there will still be fierce fighting for territory there, but I think the Russians have made some gains, as I say, north and south. Right, let's move on to what it says about the rest of Donetsk. Russian forces conducted limited ground attacks in western Donetsk, according to the Ukrainian General Staff. The Russians conducted unsuccessful operations near Vuhledar. A Russian mill blogger claimed that battles near there are positional in nature now. So there are fewer kind of throwing endless lines of mechanized equipment at Vuhledar and watching it explode. A Russian spokesperson has claimed that the Russians repelled a Ukrainian reconnaissance in force operation in somewhere in that area, unspecified. So that is down here in the Vuhledar area. No changes to mapping here, and no other details other than that. Some minor changes to the mapping around Velika Novosilka and Kushnya. Deep State map has some gains for the Russians there, but I don't know if it is gains. It looks rather like just rejigging the map again. This quite often happens. You're trying to work out whether there are red arrows there to signify an attack, and if not, it could just be suddenly, because you don't have information all the time about every inch of the battlefield and or the front line and who's controlling what, and then you might get a bit of geolocated footage that's on Twitter or Telegram that then now we know that the Ukrainians are here, or now we know the Russians are definitely here. We didn't know it was kind of grey zone before, or like the last time we heard about it was like a month and a half ago, so 6 weeks later we're like, now we got some geolocated footage to show that Russians are there. So it could be, it's not that they've necessarily attacked there over the last 24 hours is the point. But anyway, just aligns with the river a little bit more, but that's the situation there. Right, let's go and see. Let's go and delve into Kherson a little bit here, which is mentioned quite a lot in the ISW. As we come to the top of the ISW to their preamble, and let's just dip into that. So, the Russian military command is likely attempting. No, not that one. Sorry. Russian mill bloggers have provided enough geolocated footage and textual reports to confirm that Ukrainian forces have established positions on the east or left bank of the Dnieper River, Kherson Oblast, as of April the 22nd, though not at what scale or with what intentions. Geolocated footage published by a Russian mill blogger yesterday shows that Ukrainian forces have established positions on the Dnipro River bank north of Oleshki and advanced up to the northern outskirts of the settlement on the E97 highway, as well as west of Dachi. And we'll have a look at this in a second. This footage also indicates that Russian forces may not control islands in the Kinka and Chaika rivers, less than half a kilometer north of the geolocated Russian positions near the Antonevsky Bridge. Russian mill bloggers claimed on the 20th and 22nd that Ukrainian forces have maintained positions on the East Bank for weeks, established stable supply lines on these positions, and regularly conduct sorties in the area, all indicating a lack of Russian control over the area. Another mill blogger's battle map claimed that Russian forces do not control some Dnipro River Delta islands southwest of Kherson city as of April 22nd, suggesting possible Ukrainian advances on these islands. Right. Okay, so much to talk about here. If we go, so southwest is here. Now, this mapping is as of Syriac map some time ago. Deep State map has none of this area here under Russian control. Okay, so that could indicate that actually the Ukrainians have advanced in that area there. Some mill bloggers complained that the slow rate of Russian artillery fire due to the over-centralization of the Russian military command allowed Ukrainian forces to land on the East Bank. Russian forces may be prioritizing maintaining defenses in urban areas such as Oleshki and Novakokova, leaving the islands in the Dnipro River Delta unmanned. The extent and intent of these Ukrainian positions remain unclear, as does Ukraine's ability and willingness to maintain sustained positions in this area. ISW is recoding territory on the east bank of the Dnipro River to Ukrainian held only now because this is the first time ISW has observed reliable geolocated imagery of Ukrainian positions on the east bank, along with multi-sourced Russian reports of an enduring Ukrainian presence there. So that's pretty fascinating stuff, I think. Indeed, the ISW here is talking about that, recoding their mapping to reflect exactly what is taking place on that river delta. And let's go and have a look at some of that geolocated footage. So the claims, I showed you one of the claims previously, and I think this is the claim that is in this Telegram post here that says, if I can get the Google Translate up to give you an idea. So I talked about this a couple of days ago, and this is as follows. I'll try to describe the situation on a bank of the Dnieper in the Kherson region. It will obviously not be as cheerful as the optimists report. The Ukrainians successfully landed and entrenched themselves in the area of the boat section, which on our shore behind the Antonivsky Bridge has been hanging out for a couple of weeks now. From 1.5 kilometers behind us, the distance beyond the bridge is controlled by ours, and the rest is controlled by the enemy. So that's a good 1.5 kilometers by the sounds of it. Plus, thanks to our stupidity, the enemies there have established a stable supply for themselves, are accumulating strength, evacuating the wounded, bringing provisions and ammunition. They ride boats like effing Cuban drug lords, only there are not enough whores on boats. How the hell is this happening? And I'll tell you how it happens. This is our effing invincible bureaucracy. So I'm observing the target, I'm transmitting it above, I'm asking for artillery. There is no direct access to artillery. Everything must be agreed. As long as it is agreed, if it is agreed, the target safely Fs into the fog because the effing bloated utterly state coordinates all this for a very long time. The translation is obviously a bit dodgy. I beg your command. Let the fighters make the decisions. They do not do this because of the statutory idiocy and fear of being punished for unknown garbage and so on at all levels. Or reduce the communication steps to a minimum so that the coordination is faster. The enemy has no problems with the ammunition and equipment. They don't have such problems with copters. And in addition to dropping ammunition, with the help of copters, they throw special steel spikes to the delivery path to break through the wheels, and they succeed. A lot of people have already stayed there, plus locals are scattered. But we have seen this from the very beginning. A huge copter with the name Baba Yaga, which throws large mines, flies almost every day, is already sick of it. Our father commanders, of course, are now taking measures, preparing to send someone to clean this area. But what needs to be done before sending people there to clean up? Throw a couple of FABs there in the area of the boat station and some cottages for order. You can still attach from the sun. Again, I don't know quite what some of this means. Here are the coordinates take action. So the coordinates that are being listed here are as follows. And that is this area. So it is in this Aleshki area. And this, again, these are islands in a river delta. Is this safely on the other side of the bank? Well, I guess it is to an extent, but there are still, bits of water in the way of that. That's the Dachi area that was mentioned earlier. So in this section, so there are other coordinates given as well in other Telegram posts. Yep, so all of those are pretty much in that area. So that is where they have an element on the other side of the river, the Ukrainians. There's the Antonivsky Bridge. So that could provide them the opportunity to push on forth in the event of a counteroffensive, a large counteroffensive that takes place in Zaporizhia. I would assume could that be a foothold for them to be able to commit to a larger offensive? I don't know. There'll be lots of talk about that going forward. Anyway, that's the frontline update for today, the 23rd. I appreciate you choosing to hang out here. Please like, subscribe, and share. And the ways that you can support the channel are in the description below. Anyway, Tilda Pips, thanks. Speak later.